Why, I'm not buying that Switch 2 right now, said the Indian guy. The Switch 2's sitting on his desk. Now let me explain, okay? Let me explain myself real quick. I actually had no intentions of picking this device up, but surprisingly, Nintendo has done a pretty good job. Was that a voice crack? God damn, am I slipping through people? Jesus. But I actually had no intention. Surprisingly, Nintendo has a pretty decent stock pool of these things. I actually called up a EB Games near my place, probably like 20 minutes away. And they said, yeah, you can just walk in and pick up a Switch 2 tonight. And I was like, you know what? What if I could? So, ladies and gentlemen, I thought you typically had to pre-order these. I don't know, the last several years of like buying any electronic, it almost feels like you either have to go through a scalper or actually wait a month before these devices become available. But there's actually like Switches available. Like you can go pick them up in the store right now, at least where I live. In the outskirts of the greater Toronto area, okay? I don't want to like dox myself through this. So I was out with my brother. You know, we had good food, we had a good time, and we were like, you know what? It's 10 o'clock. Why don't we try the entire Switch? So I go to the store, and the lineup is long, okay? But it gets even longer, by the way, to the point where one of the employees has to come out, and they're just going like, listen, we can't just sell Switches to like 600 people. You're gonna have to leave. And at one point in the line, it got cut off, but we were pretty much at the front of the door anyways. I was actually pretty pleasantly surprised I got there in time. For the first time in my life, I actually managed to make going up to one of these lineups actually worth it. But to be fair, midnight releases, man, they're a dying breed, okay? I remember distinctly being in high school, like, waiting for, like, what? Gears of War, Call of Duty, Halo Reach? You know, that golden age of 360 gaming? It feels like the midnight launch is dying. Like, it's a great place. Like, you go out to these places, you talk to gamers, you meet some cool people. It's a fun vibe, okay? The last time I went to a midnight release was probably, what, like Tears of the Kingdom? So literally, it's just Nintendo keeping it alive. I imagine the next time I get to any game release that has a midnight launch, hopefully it's like GTA 6. But anyways, enough about midnight launches. I don't want to depress myself with a dying breed of something amazing. Anyways, the Switch 2. So how is it, ladies and gentlemen? It's better than the Switch 1. Obviously, it runs better than the Switch 1, obviously. And what about the actual stuff that I've heard, Muda? Does this thing actually run like a brick? So I want to just get past some of the things initially that kind of, raised red flags. So setting the Switch 2 up is really not that convoluted of an affair. You fire it up, you connect it to a Wi-Fi network. It does need to download an update once you connect it, but there are ways, I believe, that you can just skip entirely connecting and you can just go right into the Switch 2, which I haven't tried it personally, but I haven't read anywhere online that an internet connection is absolutely needed to play actual Switch 2 games. Now, I did pick up one Switch 2 game that didn't ship on a stupid game key card, and that was Cyberpunk 2077. Now, surprisingly, CD Projekt Red is the only developer other than fucking Nintendo that shipped a whole ass game on a cartridge. So yes, this is a full 60 gigabyte game on a cartridge. You don't even need to download any day one update, and it ships entirely on cart with the DLC and everything. What a novel concept. You know, it actually blows my mind that you can stick a 60 gigabyte game into like the cartridge slot of an actual Nintendo Switch and just play it without actually installing it because of reading and writing limitations. So yeah, this game actually works out of the box. Now, as far as Switch 1 games go, they also do work out of the box. But I want to talk about performance really quickly. This is something that kind of blew my mind away. Now, Cyberpunk 2077 is, in my opinion, the real showpiece piece of software for this device. It basically takes advantage of everything the Switch 2 has to offer from like functionality perspective. But from a performance level, there's two options. There's a quality mode and a performance mode. Now, if you play the game on quality, I believe it runs at like 1080p, 30 frames per second on your actual like handheld device, which looks great. But if you set it to performance, it goes up to 40 frames at 720p. Now, you might be thinking, well, it's not 60 Muda, and it's also 720p. All right, so now for the remainder of the video, I think I'll really just be showing you this footage of... Okay, so now for the remainder of this video, I really think it's better that I show you the handheld footage of Cyberpunk 2077. I actually think that's what most people who are clicking on this video probably want to see more of, and I'm just going to give you that footage instead of looking at that fat Indian guy talking into the camera. So when playing this video game, I'm going to tell you right now, it looks really nice. It's very sharp, and when I compare it to the Steam Deck, for instance, right, and I'm using the Steam Deck OLED, so not an apples-to-apples comparison, the one key difference is while the HDR and a lot of the colors look better on the OLED screen, because of how the Steam version runs, because of the fact that the Steam Deck is a Linux-based device, it's not using any NVIDIA hardware, the upscaling that you need to get a playable frame rate, so anything between 30 to anything above really on the Steam Deck, requires you to use something known as FSR. Now, you can use things like Intel XeSS, you can use other upscalers, but generally comparing this to the Steam Deck at all gives you a blurry image. And there's really no way to get that image sharp unless you're willing to sacrifice the frame rate of the game. Now, playing the Switch version of the game, the Switch 2, it runs, from my understanding, on DLSS's hardware-based upscaling. And this is like a night and day difference in terms of clarity. I'm sure if you're watching this footage that I'm putting up, it becomes pretty apparent to you that not only does the game typically run smooth, but it's also keeping its clarity, especially when things are moving around. This was the only way that I can actually play the entire version of Cyberpunk 2077 entirely in the palm of my hands without it eventually being a blurry mess. Now, here's the thing. Cyberpunk 2077 is a game that will have hitches and stutters pretty much across every platform. Now, depending on how powerful your computer is, or let's say you're playing on a PlayStation 5 or an Xbox Series S or X, the game pretty much remains locked on those systems at 60. And from my experience, the only time I ever experience a stutter on those bigger platforms is when the game is like auto-saving. Now, that stutter happens on the Switch 2 as well, but when it comes to the Switch 2 and really any handheld gaming computer, you are going to come across things like traversal stutters, hitches, any form of stutter really. It's just more taxing on these systems. Remember, this is a pretty heavy game running on mobile hardware at this point, so the fact that the footage you're seeing is smooth enough is already pretty impressive to me. I think for any game that's on the Switch 2, if it had to ship with anything, probably should have been Cyberpunk 2077, because it absolutely is the only piece of software that pushes this hardware right now to its absolute like nth degree. And not only does it push the hardware, but this is the only game where you're absolutely able to use all of the extra little features that the system has. So things like gyroscopic aiming, mouse aiming, I find to be super good on the Switch 2. This is one of those things that kind of blew me away. Now, I've shown you handheld systems in the past, like the Legion Go, that has like a flight stick style mouse, which is cool, but it's still not super accurate. The Switch 2, you can rip off one of the Joy-Cons, the right one, and you can basically place it like an actual mouse and use it with a pretty stunning amount of accuracy. You know, to the point where I'm surprised that one of the bundled pieces of software, well, this has no bundled piece of software, wasn't already like Mario Paint. That would have been an amazing release title just to showcase the use of that mouse. Now, the mouse works great in things like Cyberpunk 2077 on the performance mode. Generally, for quality, I wouldn't recommend using a PC mouse at 30 frames per second. It'll make it feel even worse. At least that's what my experience goes with. Now, in performance mode, Cyberpunk 2077 runs pretty well. And, generally it's not 40 all the time. It'll go down to like, in the mid 30s, but I believe the screen has like a variable refresh rate. So even if the frame rate is fluctuating, it still feels incredibly snappy to play. Like, this is the clearest, snappiest way and the best looking portable way to play Cyberpunk 2077. Not only is it clear, does the graphics look good, it's not going to be as good as the PS5 and certainly not the PC with like all the ray tracing enabled. I'm sure everyone gets that. But for a handheld mobile piece of hardware that's using far less wattage than those bigger systems, I think the readout you're getting here is genuinely very impressive. Now, I think the onboard speakers are pretty impressive for this device. Actually, that's what kind of really got me. The sound quality on the Switch 2 without any headphones is actually a very big increase, at least to me, over the Switch 1. In fact, I would say it's over the Steam Deck or any of these handheld gaming PCs. But where it kind of does suck is the display. Now, the display isn't terrible, and I'm sure for everyone watching it's mostly serviceable, but this thing comes with HDR. And HDR on like an LCD display never really hits right to me. Like the colors are not going to pop as hard as something like the Steam Deck OLED or even the Switch OLED. So if you're used to that, if you're used to the color quality on that panel, this is definitely going to feel like a little bit of a downgrade. Now, the next thing that I kind of want to talk about, and this is very important for like any of these systems, is battery life. The battery life on this device is not really impressive. It kind of reminds me of like Switch 1. So you're getting around 2 to a little over 6 hours with this device. So you're going to get 2 hours if you're playing something like Cyberpunk 2077. I mean, obviously this game is going to drain the battery, but if you play something like, I don't know, Stardew Valley or, you know, something very light, you're looking at a little over 6 hours of battery life. And in between, you'll probably play like your Mario Kart Worlds, which is the only real big exclusive title out right now. That is probably going to land you somewhere between 2 to 6 hours. I haven't done much testing there. I'm not the biggest Mario Kart fan. For me, I just wanted to see how Cyberpunk kind of ran on this thing. And the battery life just was not really sucking me away, okay? The battery life on a Switch OLED is pretty decent. The battery life on a Steam Deck OLED, again, not an apples to apples comparison, but realistically, you will get a better battery life on the Steam Deck. Maybe not like on the Rogue Allies or anything else, but yeah, it's just the cost of like, the system is pushing more performance in general, obviously running games like Cyberpunk 2077, but the fact that the screen is like 1080p and it's 120 frames per second. So yeah, all these things are going to be taking away battery life from a portable system, which I'm sure for some people who play this stuff, who plays the Switch docked, or if you're somebody that like, oh, I'm always with like a power brick next to me anyways, it's probably not a big deal to you. But if you're somebody like me where travel is pretty important, like this is why I use a lot of these handheld systems, because I can bring them with me on planes, I can travel around with them. It's awesome for me to have as much time as possible away from a power brick, okay? Or just to have something available, right? Because otherwise, for me, I would rather just stick and play on my PlayStation 5 or something. But yeah, this is kind of a sticking point for me. Battery life, I think could have been better than what we got right here. I think the screen, while it's serviceable, you know, if you're going up from an OLED, it's definitely going to feel like a goddamn downgrade. Now, from a gaming perspective, if you're somebody like that has only ever owned a Switch, you've never played on a PC, you've never played on any other modern system, yeah, this is going to feel like a night and day situation. Games like Fortnite look not only better, but they run better. They feel like they're actually the games all of your friends are playing on the other bigger systems. When you play games like Hogwarts Legacy, it is genuinely a different game compared to the Switch 1 version of Hogwarts Legacy, which was a heavily fragmented game. And that's another game that uses the mouse to stunning efficiency. A lot of these games do take advantage of some of that Switch hardware. So it's kind of interesting and neat to see. There are other games out there like Hitman, recently dropped. I don't have any interest in picking that up because I play that game mostly on the PC, and because of its online requirement for progression, I don't really think that it's a great portable game to be bringing with you unless serious changes are made there, which again, you know, it's something that I can do on the Steam Deck through mods and private like clients that I can launch where I can have an offline progression, something I can't do on the actual Switch 2 because of how locked down it is. Other games that have come out are games like Yakuza, and you know, those are games that I would have a lot of interest in picking up if they weren't just on these game key cards. And so this is where I want to talk about the game key cards a little bit more. So Cyberpunk 2077 is an amazing title, just simply due to the sheer fact that they ship the entire game on the cartridge. Now, this is a device that comes with 256 gigabytes of storage. Now, that might sound like a lot, and it's a big upgrade over the original Switch's like, what, 32 gigs? But the problem with 256 is because of how the games have been upgraded, because of the quality of these games, their file sizes have jumped up. A Mario Kart game is now 20 gigabytes at launch. Cyberpunk alone is just shy of 60 gigabytes as a download. Games like Yakuza 0, for some reason, have jumped up to 40 to 50 gigabytes in size. Games like, I think Split Fiction might be touching 60 gigabytes. So immediately when you download a few of these new Switch 2 titles, sooner or later you're going to start running out of that storage. Now you can always stick in a micro SD, but that's also another 80 bucks that you have to spend at a store, 70, 80 bucks, whatever. Now, if you're not picking up what I'm putting down here, the simple TLDR is if these game key cards, they actually contain the entire game instead of just the license, then a lot of people's issues with storage sizes on the Switch 2 would be a non-issue, because you then have the option of buying physical. Like right here, I'm playing Cyberpunk without it taking up 60 gigabytes on my actual Switch 2. And the big benefit of this too is also because it's a cartridge, I literally can just plug this in and play it within seconds, which is still actually kind of awesome. It's been a couple generations of consoles where we have not had the ability to just stick the disc in and not have files from the disc installed to the hard drive just so games can load normally, right? Because Blu-rays and discs are generally not fast enough to support a lot of the assets we have in these big budget video games. So going into the future with the Switch 2, if the game key cards become a normality, which honestly I think it might as well be, because I've seen them actually get sold at game stores. People pick them up at the store. They just, the grand majority does not care. And if these key cards become ultimately more popular, ignore the fact that it's a game preservation nightmare, but also understand the fact that it's going to be a situation where even if you buy things physically, literally at that point, your Switch 2 will probably only have enough storage to support a few games at a time. And generally, these games will get bigger, right? This is just day one of the Switch 2's life cycle. But down the road, whether it be Nintendo's first party, which I think generally will do a pretty good job at optimizing their stuff, but when it comes to the third parties, I don't imagine, companies like Square Enix are going to put the extra effort or put a whole lot of effort into making sure games like Final Fantasy VII Remake, any of those titles are going to be those titles alone are not going to be titles that are at least 70, 80, maybe 100 gigabytes on your actual Switch 2. So if you buy this, then you probably should also invest in higher storage cards to also be bundled in, because the storage is going to be sapped pretty quickly. Now, beyond all of this, ladies and gentlemen, I think the Switch 2 is not, I don't want to jump and say it's disappointing. I feel like it depends. There's two types of people that are only Nintendo gamers, which for you guys, bro, this is a huge step up, okay? You're finally getting some real playable frame rates and resolutions for that you have not been experiencing for several years now. So it's a pretty big jump up. The power of the system is somewhere, I think I've heard, between the PS4 Pro to maybe just under the Xbox Series S, which isn't bad, all right? It's really not all that bad. I think you guys are going to get a lot more of the multi-platform games coming to this system, especially since it has all the DLSS stuff attached to it, which is doing a pretty good job of making really intensive games like Cyberpunk 2077 and its DLC Phantom Liberty work pretty impeccably on a handheld device. But that also said, all right, going into the future, if you're the kind of gamer that has played the Steam Deck or another handheld PC, or you have a PS5, or you have something like a PC, I would still recommend right now picking up something like the Steam Deck or something like the Asus ROG or something like the Legion Go. Because while this device is cool, it's awesome, and in a lot of cases, when it comes to just Cyberpunk 2077, this is the premier portable way to play the game. But I think in a couple of years down the road, as always, the handheld PC market is going to outspec this device pretty quickly. And it's going to be a situation where I think, all things considered, you'll end up getting the better deal, because this is not a cheap system to be picking up. This was an expensive purchase, right? Even without the bundles alone, just in Canadian bucks, this and Cyberpunk 2077 were probably hitting me at around just the $700 Canadian mark, which, again, for that price, you might start looking at other options. But that said, ladies and gentlemen, it's been the Switch 2. I wanted to show you as much of this footage as possible, so if you were a huge Cyberpunk 2077 guy like me, maybe this is a system it's worth picking up for you. Even if you're somebody that plays like older Switch 1 games, there is still a benefit you get. Like, even if you're not getting the upgrade packs, just loading times on this alone are pretty superior to something you're getting on the Switch 1. Like, overall, it's definitely an upgrade, but it's definitely not something that has the crazy fanfare. And, you know, like I said months ago, the Switch 2 was a disappointing system to me. And I think that disappointment kind of carried its way through with just, I don't know, how much of a lack of fanfare this device really has. So if you're somebody waiting for more games, especially more games, because right now there's really just Mario Kart World as an exclusive, and a lot of the other games that have been launch titles are games that you can find in other places, like Cyberpunk, like Yakuza. I'd hold off just a little bit longer. However, if you're somebody that wants to maybe possibly hack this device, if you're in that camp, then buying it right now might be the smartest choice. Because if there is some level of exploit available, this is the time to pick it up. But that being said, ladies and gentlemen, this is all I wanted to get out about the Switch 2. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Just like if you dislike it, I am out.